Greetings, folks. So this is a video that I've not really wanted to do because of FE considerations about getting into arguments, but I've become rather disappointed at the ability of people to sort of think things through, and I think it might not actually be that. It might be that people get stuck into a certain way of thinking. They get into this sort of assertive TI. So I have some questions to help you sort of break free from this block. And a lot of this is a consistency argument. So, for example, if you're typing somebody that using Kersey-Berens-Nardi, you type this person as ISTJ, and then you type that same person as LSI in Socionics. There are consequences to that based on what you're saying the functional model is of LSI, and then the functional model of SITX, because then the data of the person has to fit what you predict. So if you're typing that person as LSI, then the Achilles heel function has to fit, the intertype relations have to fit, and the romance style has to fit. Whereas when we look at, say, when I type somebody as ISTJ and the sort of the type image of the ISTJ, the SITX in Kersey-Berens-Nardi, we're looking at, we have the temperament, and in part of that temperament is all of the comfort sensing stuff. And so we could say, oh, that's a sort of a caregiver romance style, that's consistent. The intertype relations are consistent in that ENFJs don't like ISTJs, SITX is sits, I'll call them sits. And the other way around, I would say quite a few combinations of MBTI ISTJs and ENFPs. And Carol Linda was at a conference and she said that they asked the audience to, a lot of ENFPs there, asked the audience to put a hand in the air, how many of you are married to ISTJs? And quite a lot put their hands up. And Carol said she didn't see the attraction because her mother was ISTJ. And so one of the things so there are consequences to the typo. And so when you have people that Kersey-Berens-Nardi and me would type as SITX, and they get on well with ENFP, and the ones that we type as ISTP have a very low opinion of ENFP, and ENFPs do not like KBN ISTPs. That's all consistent. But when you type them as the opposite type in Socionics, where the functions are all wrong, you got a problem, because in order to make it consistent, you would have to reverse everything else to make it consistent. Now, I don't know if this is too much for people. So what I've done is I've broken down, I've got 11 questions for you to answer. And then in a future video, maybe some of you could try and pick a hole in Kersey temperament, and I will try to answer it. So here we go. So if the Kersey ISTJ and ISFJ are really LSI and ESI, why do all the Kersey guardians have any valuing an associative speech on a concrete level, hopping from concrete subject to concrete subject, concrete level tangential? Now, maybe for some people out there, I have to unpick this. So if you're typing someone who really is a guardian as LSI and ESI, that person will show this associative speech on a concrete level. It's still that tangenting. There wouldn't be and if they really are that, there wouldn't be the consistency amongst those four. Right. Why do all the Kersey Guardians value comfort sensor? If you're saying that SIT and Sith are really ESI and LSI, they shouldn't value comfort sensing, but they do. As Jeff says, Guardians will tell you about their medical problems because there's a consistency. Why do Guardians care about comfort sensing? Because it's part of the Guardian self-preservation instinct. Guardians are very self-present. It's part of the cautious protecting. There's consistency. And this is why I want anyone out there that disagrees with me, try to find an inconsistency in the Kersey temperaments and all of these things lining up. So all the Guardians value comfort sensing and have the caregiver helpmate interaction style. Yeah, so Kersey calls them like helpmates. And natural home, like most in KBN, Kersey Bones and Noddy, you get a lot of Guardians in medicine, and a lot of your very high IQ Guardians are going to be in medicine because it's sort of like that attention to, especially SFJs. A lot of the very high IQ. So it's like maybe 150 plus, over 130. I mean, the studies have shown that for professions of doctor and lawyer, the average IQ is 130. So I would say that a lot of the go into medicine because you've got the interest there of helping people. And so a big interest in medicine. My own GP is ESFJ, I think. There's a lot of warmth. And then here we go here. Something else to answer. Yeah, why do they like NPs? ESI and LSI don't, e.g. Kersey, ISTJs and ENFPs get on. Go into the groups and ask them. Unless you're going to then start pretending always MBTI ENFPs are mistyped EIEs. You'd have to reverse everything to make it consistent. Why do Kersey ISTJs have reduced affect display like INTJ does? Why? Why is it that the people that we see as SITX, we have stereotypes associated with those people? The train spotter, the baseball nerd, Stato on fantasy football. They sort of talk like this with a sort of bureaucratic voice. There's a character. There's some characters in this mold. I can give you the names. I can give you a real person who is SITX AF, John Major. He was so boring, they made his spitting image puppet all grey. Now in real life, he was having an affair, but ISTJs have a sex drive too. But and he had an affair with Rena Curry. But so these ISTJs, how I see ISTJ, that they can have this reduced affect display with a monotonal voice. And as soon as when I hear a quiz on the radio, and it's like, hear somebody with a flat voice, and I'm thinking, is this an ISTJ? Oh, and they did well, yeah. So very good at the pub quiz champion. So you didn't wanna. I think the character is called You Didn't Wanna. And his sort of catchphrase would be, now, I don't believe you wanted to do that. You don't want to do that like that. You want to do that like this. And there was E.L. Wisty, a character by Peter Cook, performed by Peter Cook, based on a real person. And his effect, very sort of like this kind of the anorak the anorak. Look up anorak. These people would be train spotters in the olden days. And so there is that reduced affect display, flat voice as well as part of that. Granted, ISTPs also can have reduced affect display, but it's just not in the same way as ISTJ and INTJ, the sit and the knit. Right. Yeah, because again, that's consistent. Again, this is a consistency argument. The people that we type as SITX have the reduced affect display, which is consistent with FE polar, but not as FE polar as knit, because it's a guardian, because guardians wish to belong. Even the SITX is just not very good at expressing their emotions and feelings. SITX also, looking at this, you got to look at the polar functions match as well. KBN ISTPs like John Grinder, look up the meta model, go through the meta model of all of the violations that he thinks that people make in communication. And a lot of those errors, you'll find from that as, ooh, he doesn't like people. The errors, it seems to be a critique of ENFPs. He doesn't like people sort of going towards shoulds, or the stuff like lost evidence, why you don't cite why something should be done. Some don't like comparative deletions, don't like complex equivalence, and there's other things. If you research, because John Grinder is an example of where you're going to get an ISTP talking about how he thinks and his view of how people think. And he was in the Green Berets, so he's got that assertive SE points, and he's got these intellectual points as well. And you can see that Grinder, it's like, because you don't get that many ISTPs talking about how they think. And Amanda convinced me that Wittgenstein was ISTP. And again, he was about language games in philosophy. And hard to, you can't do it, and limitations of language. But the point is with that you can see the NE polar in the ISTP, and you can see that they don't like ENFP. So there's a consistency there with the type, with the functions. Now, some schools of Socionics might say that, oh, LSI, because it's really typing in ISTJ and SITX. Oh, it's risk avoidant because of NE. And okay, so they're saying that's NE polar, therefore it's risk avoidant. Hang on a minute. So if you're associating NE with risk, doesn't that mean that TIN and FIN, TINets and FINets should take a lot of risks? They don't. And then what you come back to them and say, look, what you're doing here is you're confusing two different kinds of risks: physical risks and sort of abstract risks. INTPs and INFPs will take abstract risks and do stuff like different systems and that lot. Take their own sort of point of view, but not the physical wrestling bears kind of risks. Did I do reduced affect display? Oh, here we go. Yeah. Number 5. Why do KBN ISTPs think ENFPs are scatterbrained fools who can't think straight? Because TISX is NE allergic and NEFX is TI allergic. So ask them, ask the KBN ISTPs, go in these ISTP groups, ask them what they think of ENFPs. And then based on that, you can try and work out what their Socionics type is. Try to falsify your theory. Any theory that cannot be falsified is not worth it. Theories should make falsifiable predictions that they have to pass. Right. Why do KBN ENFPs dislike ISTPs? Tip. Because SE and TI are disdained in the NEFX. So what we're saying here is that by looking at these types from the KBN point of view, the functions line up with the predictions. So what I've actually done is I've learned a lot of stuff from Socionics, which I'm now using against Socionics to sort of move Socionics forward. I mean, this is like, not only is it not a new kind of, so it has to go forward so much, it has to be after Socionics. It has to go beyond all the errors in Socionics. It has to be reconstituted so that it's consistent. Here we go. Why are all the Kersey Guardians good at all the SI subfunctions? Because they really use SI. Answer: because it correlates to function pairs. SI and FE providing. Yeah, so the Kersey SFJs are good at providing. So you're providing sort of physical care for other people. SI of FE, consistency with intelligent actions. SI and TE, monitoring. Functions consistent with the intellect. The Kersey intellect of logistical safekeeping. Also, they use cross-contextual thinking to match the present. Now, this is something that, one of these things that sometimes people have a problem understanding. Well, because I've brought this up a lot of times. I'm going to try and describe now how Guardian NE works with their SI. They also use cross-contextual thinking to match the present circumstances to the rule in their locker. So the Guardian might be, oh, what should I do in this situation? Keyword, should. What should I do in this situation? And look towards their past experience. Why? Why are they looking back towards past experience? This is the motivational nub of the Guardian temperament. Cautious. Dario Nardi has the SI chapter. He calls it cautious protecting. That is the nub of it. Sticking to what works. What worked is in the past. What worked is in your memory. This is why SI is associated with memory. We're not saying it is memory, it's associated with memory. Just as TI is associated with reasoning power, but it's not the same. Consistent with past focus. SI subjectivity very much affected by personal past experience. 10 Guardians with 10 different personal experiences. That's how the subjectivity comes in their SI. Artisans have the here and now present focus, consistent with expedient tactics. Right, let me explain. From a Kersey point of view, and I'll show you how this is consistent with the function mapping as well. What we see on the higher type level, the definition of artisan. It is absorbed in the present circumstances. Dario had a name for this, a phrase for this in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. Immersed in the present context. Kersey point of view, Guardians are in the here and the now. So, expediency. So, whereas the Guardian will look at a situation and will think, oh, what should I do in this kind of situation? And so they look for, oh, this is a kind of situation like this. This is what we do in this kind of situation. So it's looking for the cross-contextual thinking of this kind of situation is like this in my past experience. This is what we do. We go towards that locker, the algorithms, if you like, of what we should do. That's the Guardian mentality. The SE mentality is to adapt to the present circumstances and be immersed in the present context. Situational awareness. And so, based on the present resources and present circumstances, the right move is made to fit those circumstances. And that fits the idea of the Kersey tactical intellect. And that fits the idea of SE being based in the now. Right. Artisans here and now in the present. Expedient tactics. Expediency. It's like you have a lot of politicians who are into short-term political expedience, such as Donald Trump. Not this long-range strategic thinking. It's short-range. It's tactical. It's expedient. Artisans have the here and experience. Artisans have constant speech, musicality in speech, and a tendency to like wordplays. I think that's the case. The musicality in speech. Yeah, most rappers are artisans. Think rap battling with its rhymes and wordplays. That is too much for my tender heart. Watching that battle rapping when they're going at each other, and you watch that, and you tell me that those are not SE value. They really rip it into each other, but they love it, and the audience loves it, and they're all probably SPs and likely STPs. And what I think that shows is that I do believe that from a comedic point of view, Guardians like mental imagery, artisans like word plays, plays on words, because they have that sensitivity towards the say the musicality of language, and you get this again, but not all artisans are going to be talking in like that kind of like street language, you know. They're going to be, but there is that sensitivity towards the sensory aspects, and again the mental imagery with the Guardians. There's a joke, I can't remember what the actual line is. I'd have to get the book out and it'll take a while. There's a joke that David Jason talked about when he was doing Only Fools and Horses. Again, sledging, really sort of abusing each other, still sledging. So when David Jason, there was a line in Only Fools and Horses script, and David Jason, like the artisan, did hang gliding and all that, and we're going into sort of like accommodate, and then sort of like Grandad said, "What you mean a Wendy house?" And they didn't think that was particularly fun, but the audience had a huge reaction to that. And the reason why is because the Guardians pictured it. They had the mental imagery of the Wendy house, just getting that funny mental image. And again, consistency argument. Ask Guardians about reading novels. Ask them about description. Without leading them, they'll probably say, "Oh, I want a lot of description, so then I can imagine it," and all stuff like that. Oh, that's consistent with the idea that Guardians have got good sensory imaginations. Again, consistency. So I found 11 inconsistencies with the Socionics when it comes to sensory introverts. I want to try to find some inconsistencies with my point of view. Right, so... Yeah. Why type, and this is a particular Socionics devotee out there, why type Trump as SLE and mention tactics when your definition of TI is rigid and rule-bound? So you're typing, you look at an ISTJ, an SITX, a contender Guardian, and you're saying, "Oh, that's LSI. That's an example of TI. That's all rigid and laws." And then you say, "Well, Trump, really? That's how Trump uses TI? That's not TI." Or rather, what you think is TI isn't TI, because you don't understand that introverting functions are subjective and extroverting functions are empirical, because Socionics has this asinine, underlined and in neon dichotomy called external internal. So if thinking is external and does not need to be reinterpreted, why are there ever misunderstandings between people? Why is it that books and texts can be read many different ways? Why is it that the same person can read a book differently with different experience 5 or 10 years later? Why because language, and people know this in semiotics, people know this in semantics, people know this in linguistics, the word is not made flesh. If you believe the word is made flesh, that is logocentrism. And it's a logocentric belief to believe that thinking that when one person says something, that you automatically understand what the other person means. So if you say, here's an example, such and such has giant blank. You say to the belief. The other person then looks and says, you said they were giant. That's not giant in my book. Oh, I suppose your giant is a bit bigger than my giant. So the whole meaning is not transferred across. There's an objective, there's an empirical part to that, like big means big, but how big is big? Or various words where, so for example, if a word was exactly the same as the meaning, then you wouldn't need discussions in a book on the poetics on what Aristotle meant by catharsis. And you wouldn't have people misunderstanding the poetics the way they did. So, for example, I read the poetics after reading Story by Robert McKee. And I know that if I had read poetics before McKee, I would have read it differently, because I had that background knowledge. So there's also context. So basically, language is not purely external. It's external enough that we can understand each other mostly, but there's still losses, there's misunderstandings. So that is the subjective part, but the signifier is not the same as the signified. The word is not the same as the meaning. So, for example, if I say the word iwa, what does that mean? If thinking doesn't need to be reinterpreted, I'll give you the word ear, you should instantly know what that means. But of course we like Benjamin, that's how language works. And if I was to say iwa means character, do you know what that means? And this is in the Yoruba religion, the religion of the Yorubas. You might think, oh, I've got an idea what character means. And it's like, yeah, but what it really means, though, what it's pointing to, what the sign is pointing to, is really Iwa. Character in the Yoruba religion is very SFJ. It's like selfishness and not being generous to other people is really frowned upon, and people would be ostracized, sort of being selfish. And so for them, character is really, it was completely different from what I expected when I started reading the article on this philosophical article on what Iwa is. Yeah. And it's like, oh, this is all pretty standard stuff. This is like, don't steal, don't break a covenant. Like you're listening, ENTPs and ESTPs, don't break a covenant just because it's inconvenient. You stay to your word. So anyways, my point there is you don't get all of that from Iwa. And even the way I've talked about it, if you actually talk to someone who's actually in it, they'll have a different understanding from me. So thought is not completely external. So this, again, it's an asinine dichotomy. Just like sensing is not completely external. Two women look at the same man. One might be turned on. The other one might throw up. Their sensory experience of the same man is different, because sensing is bound up with the emotional reaction. to it. That's why there's a phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That would be the subjective part of sensor, an example of the subjective part of sensor. An example of the empirical part would be maybe objective standards of beauty. But you can sort of go it with, like, if you looked at someone's taste, and people having different taste in something, where it's like, or different taste in music, and it's like, are we really experiencing the same thing? Or it's like, we're experiencing the same thing, but in a different way. There is a subjective component there. Yeah, and so there's also something else I've heard about from an information socionics point of view, is that introverts refine. Oh, refine. And how do they refine? Do 10 introverts who are, say, TI DOMs all refine in the same way? Are they likely to say that? No, they're going to refine in a idiosyncratic way. Oh, if the refining is idiosyncratic, it must therefore be subjective. So maybe I should use the word idiosyncratic. Introverts are idiosyncratic. The extroverts are more empirical. So the TI DOM will be idiosyncratic in its thinking. The FI DOM will be idiosyncratic in its feeling. And NI certainly is idiosyncratic. And SI, again, it can be idiosyncratic. All right, it's like, oh, it's got lovely hairy legs. Or if someone has a fetish, like idiosyncratic. So, and this matches what we see in real life. You know, in real life, sensing and thinking are not totally external. And you would have to eliminate thinking. You'd have to say thinking, which is to say thinking is external and doesn't need to be reinterpreted. It's like, well, how do you communicate? How do you pass thinking to another person without telepathy and without language? So you'd have to go towards very specific, tiny parts of thinking, which are very, very small percentage of thinking, which is like pure logic, which then you can say that doesn't need to be reinterpreted. That would be the same, like it's anyone with sufficiently high IQ, that follows that and will always follow that. But most thinking is not like that, and there's no need to pretend that TI is logic. Logic is a separate thing. It's just that TI apes the form, the structure of logic to make it more convincing, because INTP is looking for, because the thinking is subjective and abstract, in order to prove it, it's looking for consistency, which is what I'm doing now. It's like I'm saying, this is consistent with this, that is not consistent with that. And so in doing that, it's going through the reasoning power. If you say this, it predicts this, and therefore that. This is where the reasoning power comes in. If you're typing an ISTJ as an LSI, there are consequences to that I can falsify, because you're saying that it's going to have this kind of interaction style, this kind of romance style, and it's like, I can then follow up on that and see if that fits what is predicted. And then it's like, well, is the function map of LSI fit in the person in front, or does the function map of SITX fit better? And then I can make the case based around consistency. You've mistyped this person because your type image is wrong, because you've defined the functions incorrectly. And then when I can say, whereas the way that the functions are defined in the SITX is consistent with the affect display, the intertype relations, the correlates to the Kersey intellects, and to the socially intelligent roles that are the intellects. And it's like, try to find an inconsistency there. Whereas I found 11 here. 11. Right. So let's go with Trump. Why type Trump SLA and mention tactics when your definition of TI is rigid and rules bound? Whereas Trump. So again, inconsistency. They keep saying, oh, TI is about. Yes, because I can come back with inconsistency arguments. Right. So TI is laws. Okay, then. So we're going to make TI all rigid to fit LSI. Okay, then. There's 3 other types that use TI. Do they use it like that? Is SLE sort of like stick in the mud procedural like LSI? No. See, Galenko can get around this by using 2 things. He does. He uses charge years. TI plus is very different from TI minus. TI plus is very rigid. TI minus is how LII uses. So, and then he also uses DCNH to get out of it. Because he has 4 different kinds of LSI. He has an LSI that's like an ISTJ. He has one that's like an ESTJ, and he has one that's like an ISTP. So if you define TI as like this rigid procedural laws thing, got to follow these laws and procedures, does that fit INTP? Does that fit TIN, NET, and SET? No. So you have to come up with a definition of TI that fits those 4. And I would say that the hallmark of TI is utilitarian thinker. Is those 4 will do it their own way. And sometimes for the sake of doing it their own way, even if it's less efficient than doing it the proper way. NTJs will just do it. Gamma MTs will just do it the way that is the most efficient, whether that's by the book or not. They don't care. Whereas there's a bit of ego involved with the TPs. The TPs to so we say the alpha and beta thinking types to do it their own way. Right. Oh, here we go. Right. SE, immersed present context with TI, subjective. Right. So again, let's look at Trump and see how this fits. SE, immersed in the present context. Short-termism. Tactics with TI, subjective thinking, rationally elaborated. That's what TI is. Subjective thinking, rationally elaborated. Do not confuse the rational elaboration, which is in the shape, which emulates logic, with logic. Because I'll give you an example. We look at arguments. Someone has a sound argument versus someone has a valid argument. So a valid argument is an argument which is internally consistent. A sound argument is one which is internally consistent and true because the premises are true. So you can have an internally consistent valid argument based on false premises. And you can also have, for example, if you compare the syllogism with the enthymeme. So the syllogism is, so from 2 true statements, you deduce a third. And those 2 true statements are said to be necessary, so 100% true. Whereas the enthymeme, which apes that, uses 2 statements which are probable, or rather that your audience believes in, and then a third that follows from that. So you see, the thing is, the enthymeme follows the shape of the syllogism, and so you can say the enthymeme is the rhetorical syllogism. But the enthymeme is subjective because it depends on the premises. You can plug different premises in and still have an elaborate, internally consistent argument, but the subjectivity is in the premises and the choosing of the premises. So for example, so here's a tip. Here's the NTP way of persuading somebody. The argument would be to take something that someone believes in and to show how what you want them to believe follows from what they already believe in. You believe in A, therefore you should believe in B. Example. Martin Luther King was talking about getting people to believe in sort of racial equality. And so he goes to and quotes the Bible and he quotes the Constitution, two things which the white audience believes in the United States in the 60s. And he quotes in Lincoln, maybe, I think it was Jefferson. All men are created equal. That is a probable premise. That is something which the audience believes in. So it's like, you believe in this, therefore that. So there's a consistency argument based on, and its use of enthymemes. Also, the enthymeme is not in the strict structure of a syllogism of A and B, then C. But sometimes it's sort of like inferred. But that's an example of where you can get the subjectivity even in something which has the form of something which is logical, a logical shape. Subjective elaborated. Is my thinking not both subjective and rationally elaborated? So there you go. The premises which I'm working off, and then the way I'm rationally elaborating all this, where it is internally consistent, and I'm open to anyone trying to find an inconsistency in my thinking. Yeah, our TI works for all TI wheelhouse types. I would argue that Dario's TI leans too much towards NTPs. So again, it's STPs, present situation, thinking for themselves, thinking on their feet, being expedient in the present situation. TI and NTPs is part of the strategic intellect, and it's also going to be, there's also going to have correlations with NE, and so connections and consistency between ideas and building models and going towards strategic construction. And that's where you get the structural logic, and that's where Socionics makes a mistake, because it's a bunch of NTPs defining TI, and they'll say, oh, TI structural logic. It is for you because you're an NTP, and your natural intellect is towards strategic construction of theories and models. But it's not structural logic for STPs. For STPs, they're using TI with SE. So that's expediency. How to solve this present problem based on this situation, because artisans are based in the here and now. 9. Why do the socionic sensory introverts, especially LSI and SI, look like the odd ones out in their quadras? Is it not suspect that the sensory mirror pairs have less in common than the abstract mirror pairs? Yeah. E.g., LSI and SLE, Putin and Trump, versus LII and ILE. So what I would argue is that when you read the profile of LII and ILE, they are more similar to each other than if you read a profile of LSI and SLE. Because really what those two are ESTP and IST bloody J. Sit. A contender guardian. There. About Putin. In comparing Putin and Trump, Putin is far more cautious and logistical than Trump, and Trump far more impulsive and tactical. Look at Putin's reduced affect display. By the way, the fear in his eyes is consistent with counterphobic 6. Yeah. On the Russian political spectrum, Putin is right in the middle. Right in the middle. Because you have got hardcore nationalists to the right of him, and to his left, you have communists. So those are the choices. So you can see why a lot of Russians go for safe Putin. Like well, we don't want the communists. Because it's like the communists haven't got the sense to pretend to be less communist than what they are. Not none of this like Bill Clinton stuff, moving to the center in the 1990s. Anyway, 10. KBN guardians like sensory description in novels, I mentioned this, and mental imagery and humor. That is a falsifiable claim. Try and falsify it. Ask your guardians about novels. This is the SI imaginative subfunction. See Jean Perret's Alpha Quadra Humor Valuing Comedy book, The New Comedy Writing, Relations Between Ideas and Mental Imagery. Yeah, I see him as like, he's probably an NTP, Jean Perret. Yeah, doesn't like wordplays. Right? Usually wordplays have to be extremely good. But a lot of artisans will tell jokes with wordplay then. Right. Right. In comedy 11. There's another one. Yes. Here we go. Vanderhoot's description. Can't blame Kersey for this. Kersey was 16 when he wrote this. And he wrote it in German. Laura Hutton. Laura, not chained to the kitchen sink, Hutton. Translated it. And in the English version came out in 1939. I wonder if she was INTP. Translating a book by another INTP. Here we go. Why does Vanderhoop's 1937 SI Dom profile sound like Kersey Guardian? Because he's describing the actual type rather than making it up. This lends their lives a certain solid comfort, although it may lead to somewhat ponderous caution. 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 That's what Dario has put. Caution. What are these names for the cautious protectors, active adapters, keen foreseers? Yes, foresight, developing with NI. There we go. Cautious protectors. That's the instinct, to cautiously protect. I'm going to switch to this. Ponderous caution. If instinct becomes too deeply attached, if instinct becomes too deeply attached to all kinds of minor details. Also, let's get empirical. Go in these groups, these ISTJs, ask them what their Enneagram type is. Oh, I'm a 6, I'm a 6. Oh, the 6, eh? Right. Okay. What's your instinct like? Oh, self-elevation, yeah. Now, sometimes an INTP, self-pres 6, can look like an ISTJ, but if you look deeper, it's like they'll be by the book at work when they don't want to lose the job, but at home they'll be utilitarian. That's what happened with Laura on the channel. We've mentioned this. She gets mistyped as ISTJ. But she's not got ISTJ face. No voice. Here we go. The advantages and disadvantages of this type are well brought out in the reserved and conservative farmer with his care, SI, for his land and his beasts, and his tendency to carry on everything down to the smallest detail in the same old way. Why? Because that's safe. You know, it works. Tried and true. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Passive resistance to anything new. I edited it out like just to boom, boom, boom. Yes. So he's describing basically the essence of Guardian. What are the at the end, I'm going to show you the names for all of these bloody temperaments over the years. Where these kinds of people have been sort of recognized. Where is it? Oh, I'll hold it up to the camera. Where it is. Is that Hippocrates? Is that all of those? Oh, that's all of those. Right. The personologists. The names for the various groups. The Wehrgabe, by the various people. There's a lot of Germans in there, a lot of German typologists. What are the contradictions to be found when mapping Kurz's intellects, empirical social roles, tactical, logistical, diplomatic, and strategic onto the valued function pairs in the wheelhouse? You see, there we are, making predictions. Making predictions. You see, it's falsifiable. If we say TINX is TINNE, and then we map that over to strategic construction, and then we map over TE and NI to strategic coordination of resources towards long-term objectives. Then we map over FE and NI to mentoring, developing people for their own good directive, to FI and NE to sort of mediating. Think of like someone in some family counselor, like integrating sort of different points of view to sort of reach a consensus. So you can sort of like seeing the different points of view, like being around with the NE, being useful there, and the FI trying to bring those values into harmony. So you can see that how, from a Kersey point of view, the role of the mediator, reconciler of disputes, say what used to be called marriage guidance counselor, and the functions drawn on the NE, looking at things in a different point of view, and the FI harmonizing the values, that you can see that the type INFP would be well is set up to do that job well. And so that's part of the diplomatic enabling. And again, you can do this, you map this on with the function pairs. And so it's like, well, these functions map with these intellects that we can see. So it's like we type someone as, say, and you can say, oh, that means they should be good at this, or it's like, oh, we can check that. Oh, they're bad at this, they're good at this, and it's like, oh, that fits with the functions. There's no inconsistency there. And so you can look for that. And there's also another way you can do this, and that is, again, being empirical. You look for those people that are opposites in Kersey and in Socionics, they double conflict. So, for example, Finn and Set will conflict more than Tin and Seth. SEFI and TINE will conflict less than FINE and SETI. Why? Because ESFP, SEFI is not trying to impose itself and subordinate the INTP. ESFP just wants the egghead to go away. Whereas ESTP will try to bully and subordinate INFP, the Fin, FINE. Because the Kersey dichotomy is that the opposite is directive versus informing, where ESTP is directive and INFP, Fin, is informing. But when you look at, yes, there are communication difficulties, and I've had those with Jeff between Tin and Seth, the collaborator Artisan, SEFX. But Jeff's not trying to control me. It's not imposing. In other words, Jeff's not putting his SE on me. ESFPs are not putting their SE on me. They're not asserting their SE onto me. But ESTP will do that to INFP, to FINX. So there's an interesting, so it's like, so that will sort of show, oh, there's some Kersey dichotomies that Socionics is not picking up that are important. Another pairs that are opposite in Kersey and in Socionics, good old ISTP and ENFP. Double conflictors, yeah. Right. If you somehow don't like empirical falsification, we can try a TI falsification method. Find some contradictions in KBN and I will address those. Bonus question. Why are different schools of Socionics inconsistent with each other? Probably due to different functions in different function definitions. But why are those different? There's the thing. If you think you're describing the actual types, why are the schools inconsistent with each other? Because there's basic problems in the way TI and SI is defined. and also some issues with SE and FI as well. Right then, I'm going to show you the guardians that have been seen throughout history by the historical personologists. Of course, we've got sort of Kersey's word for it, that this is how he translates the names. So we have, okay, function, yes. Functions in the tribe. Prize hunter, the hunter, versus the gatherer, the farmer. 2 evolutionary strategies, the soothsayer. Well, the tribe doesn't need that many soothsayers. Look, we only need 1 NF, get out of it. Can you farm? Can you hunt? The toolmaker. Right. Totem. There, guardian. Logistical, intellect. Hippocrates. Melancholic. Yeah. Pistic. Proprietary. Yeah, all German. Yeah, Paracelsus. That was funny. That was funny. So this guy, Theophrastus von Hoheim, he had a really big ego, I reckon, because he called himself Paracelsus because he thought he was smarter than Celsus. I think that's what it means. Eric Adic. Is it Adices? There, conservator. Now we have to assume that Kersey has translated these accurately so as not to like cook the books. Right, so I think Isabel Briggs, you know, that's the real name. That's the name she was born with. What's her husband got to do with anything? Judicious. Yeah. I mean, the J versus P works for concrete types, not so much with, especially for the IN types. Dear me. It's okay for the EN types, JP. Like an ENFP is going to score as a P on the MBTI. Unless it's like very sort of self-disciplined from a particular background. Patient, melancholic, economic, conservator, propriety. This is a theme there in the names of the guardian. Then with the artisan, hedonic, the salamander, because the changeable part of it, radical, aesthetic, hypomanic as in just below mania. Impulsive, yes, impulsive. Yeah. Impulsive, patient, relativistic, trusting. Yeah, but there's a lot of rationals that would be pretty trusting as well when it comes to socionics, rather than sort of like, you know. Well, I know what the LIIs are like though. They see these things. They just don't speak up. I've spoken to them. Right then. So you see the themes there, but we have to. But this assumes that assumes. So, for example, that Eric, from the way it would translate into English, really did see that group as impulsive and that group as patient and relativistic and trusting, because rather than sort of Kersey's interpretation of what he said in order to build his case. But so this is just an example of the personologist seeing those types through the centuries. Oh, dear me. I'm going to stop before I get up to the hour. End broadcast. Oh, that's my character checklist.